Okay, here we go. This is going to be something very, very special. And it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator who is coming back. She actually did this at the very first Out to Innovate we had on this very stage when this building was brand new. It had only been open a couple of months. So it gives me great joy to welcome back Shirley Jihad. Besides being a great buddy and, indulges me when I ask her to do things, Shirley is an award-winning reporter, anchor, host, and producer. She works in public radio and television. At the Tavis Smiley Show, broadcast nationally on PBS, she delivered segments on a wide range of issues, particularly during the time of transition and turbulence with the Trump election and presidency. Her guests included national columnists and Nobel Prize winners discussing issues like growing income inequality, the effect of Trump-style rhetoric on your brain, I missed that one, and aging in America, that I can relate to. Her voice has been heard across Southern California, most recently interviewing newsmakers and analysts as a fill-in host on KPFK. She served audiences as a reporter, anchor, and host on our local public radio station, KPCC. It says here Los Angeles, but it's really Pasadena. And at WBEZ in Chicago. Her documentaries revealed national recognition, and she's won the National Associated Press and Robert F. Kennedy Awards. Her work often focuses on bringing forward diverse voices of people rarely heard in the media. She was honored with the Studs Terkel Media Award for coverage of underserved communities. So it is my pleasure to welcome her, and one of the things I also want to say about her, we're really happy that she is a faculty member in the Annenberg School of Communications. So welcome back, Shirley. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm so happy to be here with all of you on this great weekend. And first, a big thank you to Amy Ross and Shelley Diamond and the organizers of this really significant weekend conference. So thank you guys so much, and I'm delighted to be here. And I have to say, you guys came to the right place at the right time, because this right here, this is the Rockstar panel. For anybody who's like oohing, eyeing, and geeking out over science, this is the Rockstar panel. This panel, we've got people looking out over the vast universe, looking for life and peeking under the surface of Mars, trying to see whether we can exist on other planets. We've got people building brand new institutions, building a brand new medical school from scratch, and making bold initiatives around innovation and inclusion, like free tuition if you're interested in medical school. We've got leaders directing labs that are exploring innovations in healthcare, and we've got educators developing exactly what it means to learn those critical thinking skills that we all need going forward, and helping the next generation of mathematicians. And we've got engineers building the next generation of cars, lighter, faster, and more energy efficient for us all. So we're going to meet our all-star panel one at a time. Here is Dr. Mark Schuster. He's the founding dean of the new medical school, Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, that is being built in Pasadena right now. Welcome. Let's also welcome Dr. Julia Bradsher. She is president and CEO of Huntington Medical Research Group. It's a non-profit independent research institution in Pasadena. Let's welcome Ron Buckmire, dean and professor of mathematics at Occidental. And let's welcome Dr. Arianna Morales, a research scientist, global R&D at General Motors. Also 2019 Engineer of the Year from NOGLSTP. Thank you. And let's welcome Vlada Stamenkovic. Vlada Stamenkovic from JPL. He is an earth and planetary scientist and theoretical physicist. He's studying how planets are born, live, and die. Welcome. Everybody. So we're going to start off with sort of the basic question, like how you got to where you are, and about any challenge or benefit that you experienced as a result of being out as a scientist and an innovator. So, Dr. Schuster, some top institutions around the country have just, were smart enough to affiliate with you, like Harvard and Yale and UCLA and Rand. Tell us about your path into medicine and how that coincided with your path coming out. Also, I should give you a note that he's written some great articles about being out in the field as a doctor, coming out in medicine. So that's a really good article to check out if you haven't. Go ahead.
So I don't know how much detail you want, but my path, can I be heard? Is this, my path to medicine was circuitous. I wasn't pre-med. I was a history major in college, as we talked about over lunch, and I worked in Congress one summer on health issues, and I got involved with our campus, our college campus, converting to have access for people who were using wheelchairs, and it just kind of went from there that I wanted to work on health issues and health policy, and then decided I wanted to be a doctor. So I'm one of those people who had to take some pre-med courses after I graduated from college. And I've loved it. For anyone who's thinking of it, it's been great. And I'm a pediatrician, like your mom. And so, but in terms of coming out and how that's intersected, I would say, I'm happy to answer specific questions, but I knew I was gay when I was 12. I first came out to another person senior in college. And then in medical school, I told friends, but also was very careful. And then finally, I got a joint degree, a master's in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government. And I wound up being super public because I, with some others, started a group. At the time, it was a lesbian and gay group. There were no others included in our thinking at the time. But then we put on a very big public event that was covered by the local public television station, and I was the one who introduced it. So at that point, I was just out, and have been out ever since, as out as I can be. And I'm from a generation where that was complicated, and not everybody wanted to have openly gay people in their environment, but it's changed a lot now. And so now I'm certainly, anytime anyone hires me, recruits me, they know who I am. It's all over my CV and the things I've done research on, the particular speech I gave that you're talking about that wound up getting published. And it's been wonderful to be able to be out and not have to hide, and just sort of, it's really nice not having two lives. The professional one where you're always avoiding pronouns and not really saying what you did this weekend, versus a private life. Having that integrated has been life-saving for me.
Thank you. Dr. Bradsher, you grew up in Arkansas, very conservative family. We had talked a little bit about this. Maybe you can touch on it for the group. And sure. You then spent time in Boston and most recently Michigan before recently moving to Southern California. So tell us about your journey.
So I did grow up in the South. I grew up in a very small town. And then fast forward to in my late 20s, I think while I was growing up, I knew there was something different about me, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. All those girls that I hung out with, I wasn't quite sure. But fast forward to my first year of graduate school, and it's actually the scientific method itself that enabled me to come out. So there is a story there. So my PhD is in medical sociology, so the social sciences. And one of my first classes was a research methodology class. And we had to take something that we were involved in and do what's called a participant observation. So it's it's one of the methods that's used in sociology. So I was an evangelical Christian, quite involved in a church, and I was taking this class, Sunday school class, called Irregular People in a Regular World. And it was every week we talked about a different type of person who was different, irregular. So we talked about everything from people who had mental illness. We talked about people who had drug and alcohol addiction. We talked about all the 7 deadly sins, and then we talked about gay people. And so I decided to do this Sunday school class as my participant observation. And I was, taking my notes and looking at it. And then one day after we did the session on how to respond to gay people, that was the gist of it, was how do you address people who are different? Love the sin, hate the, sorry.
Freudian.
Love the person, hate the sin. Well, I was going through my notes, and I thought, I think they're talking about me. And so that is how I realized that I was gay. There was a whole process that I won't go into after that, but it was really the scientific method that enabled me to come out.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Dr. Ron Buckmire, you were born in Grenada, grew up in the U.S. and in Barbados, and became a young chess champion and fell in love with mathematics. Tell us about how you had your path to coming out in that journey.
So I've always loved math, thought it was very easy, so I just sort of kept on taking lots of math. And I went to upstate New York from Barbados. I lived in the United States before, and so I was at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I took more math. I learned, what I really learned was my very first year as a freshman, I did summer research because there was an issue with my visa. I wanted to stay over the summer, and I learned that they would actually pay you to do undergraduate research, to actually do math. And I was so amazed by that I said, this is definitely what I'm going to do. And so I graduated early, and I worked with that same professor to get my PhD later. During the transition from going to from undergrad to graduate school at the same place, I suddenly realized that there was a reason why I sort of would notice the guys in the room and realized that I was gay. I immediately came out. I don't know if this is still a term. I became big fag on campus. So I revitalized the LGBT group. I founded a radio show called Homo Radio. I started running sort of, I guess now in the time of Reddit, you'd call them AMAs, Ask Me Anything. We call them Queer 101, where we would just go to dorms and anyone could ask us anything about sort of being gay or LGBT to sort of educate students about, yes, there are gay people at this institution, and here's one of them, so ask us anything. So I generally was, my trajectory through an academic career has always been to just sort of be so out that there are really no questions. So I never really have to sort of come out to people. They already know before I show up in the door. It's either on my CV or lovely now in the time of Google. If you Google my name, immediately it becomes very clear that I'm LGBT. I did use my time as in graduate school as well, because you have lots of free time. I founded what I thought was going to be at that time the one place on the internet where you could find anything that was to do with LGBT. It was called the Queer Resources Directory. I founded it in 1991. That's before the World Wide Web existed. And I just thought, I'm a bit of a pack rat, so anything that comes across the internet at the time that was related to LGBT stuff, we would just collect it, and we put it in this Queer Resources Directory. And eventually, of course, that became too big a job, and on Yahoo, et cetera, and other web aggregators formed, and they were able to maintain LGBT information. The connection between my coming out and me being a mathematician and college professor, I don't really see much of a connection. It's sort of just always been an aspect of my life, the fact that I've liked STEM. I've always tried to forward the proposition that math, and I guess by extension STEM, is a human enterprise. It does matter that this thing is done by people, and therefore it matters the identity of those people who do this thing. And some of the people who do this are not straight white male people. They are others. They have other kinds of intersectional identities. And I think that's the way I live the idea of LGBT and STEM interacting.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Morales, you are female, Latina, lesbian in the very male-dominated world of not just engineering, but cars and engineering. Tell us about your journey at General Motors.
At General Motors,
Or your
let's
journey.
just begin with, make it shorter because we can talk here for an hour or so.
Of course.
Yes, I came out in my last year in graduate school to myself. I mean, I knew that I was irregular, Irregular person.
This was in Venezuela? Or
No. Venezuela at all, because it's a very Catholic, closed type of society. So I knew I was different, but I didn't know how different. But then I came to the States to get my PhD in the last year of that. From the first year to the last year of my graduate work, I very progressively began to come out. But then there always was the thing about pronouns, about what did you do the weekend, I went with a friend, this way, never, more specific. So that made me also not reachable, not approachable, because I didn't open too much to anybody, because I didn't want to say, So I was the only female on the year of my promotion, let's say my PhD group. There were 12 of us, 1 woman, 11 men. My PhD is in metallurgical engineering, which is of all the engineering areas, one of the less populated by female. So after that, I was hired by GM, and I moved to Michigan. And something else happened in my life, and I decided that, somebody had to see me completely before I die, Somebody have to understand me, and if they don't want to understand me, well, tough luck, but I have to tell people. So I went to volunteer in the Detroit area in the, it's called Affirmations, it's the LGBT community center, and participated in the fundraising to have our own building and so forth. And that made me see that there is good people everywhere. There is people that want to accept you, and there is people that maybe are not prepared to do so. But the best thing you can do is be honest with them and show yourself, and be kind and be present. So I decided that I had to do that at work too. At work, it was really difficult. I worked in R&D, and when I was hired at GM, in my lab, there was a metallurgical lab, there were 24 scientists and support personnel. I was the 24 scientists, the youngest at the time that was hired, the only woman, as far as I know, the only gay, and the only Latina. And I was not too tall anyways between the rest of them. So they had many ways to discriminate me, And also the auto industry is really very male-oriented. I mean, you see many more guys that are gearheads than women that like cars. So, but I decided that I was coming out, and I began to volunteer in GM. There is a group it's called the GM Plus. That is the GM LGBT group, and I volunteer in the the organizing group, and began to go out every year to the fairs, the community fairs, just to say, here we are, this is GM+, we are gay. And that sense of community, sense of showing people, sense of, or the idea of letting people know that we are like they are. There is no difference. That's one of the things. We are all people. So, and here I am. So now I don't say my friend, now I say my wife, which is something that 20 years ago, I wouldn't ever think that I would ever say, you know. So that's it.
Vlada, you are a young out scientist. You have had experiences on 2 continents at least that I've heard about. This guy, he speaks like, what, 7 or 8 languages or something? Tell us about your trajectory into planetary sciences and the differences, maybe, if you want to share some about your experiences in Europe versus here, if you want to share that.
Yeah, gladly. Maybe it's a little bit complicated,
Okay.
as much as in life. So, I was born in Yugoslavia. Well, Yugoslavia still existed. That was just before the war. Maybe remember like the big things happening like in the 90s over there in Europe, people doing bad things to each other. That was Yugoslavia. But when I was 7 years, my parents, my father's an engineer, my mom is a poet, very loving people, but generally very homophobe. You think poetry, how gay can you get, but still, not enough. We moved then to Switzerland. And I think I didn't really think much about, where I stand on the spectrum of sexuality during my teens, because my youth was very rough, driven by racism. So my childhood was mostly being beaten and fighting in classes. When I grew up in Switzerland, teachers would say, well, those foreigners, especially those from Yugoslavia or Serbia, no matter how good they are, they're still dumb, so we keep them down. So although I was the best in school, I would not be, I had to fight to be able to get to the next level all the time. And I remember in Switzerland, you have a lot of grades of going up, and you have to be always competitive to get there. So I was always fortunate enough to be, one of the, if not the best in the school, but I had to fight still, thanks to my parents, to be able to get to those levels, because foreigners usually don't do that. So in my gymnasium, so the last school before university, there were only, in the whole school, there were only 2 real foreigners. That was me, that Serbian boy, and an Iranian girl. Her name is Elham, I'm Vlada, so everybody thought I'm a girl, she's the boy, the other way around. But so when I got to that school, my first welcome letter from my class was a letter showing the Slavian flag and saying, if you don't commit suicide, then we will kill you by the end of this class. What? So that was my experience. So it didn't give me much space to think about, I think, reflecting back about, who do I see myself in sexual identity? I was more like, how do I manage to survive this year, emotionally and psychologically? So a lot of times, these teens were just to build an identity as just, trusting yourself, not being destroyed, finding friends. And only when I managed then to go to university, which is the ETH in Zurich, to study physics and mathematics. I'm a physicist and a theoretical physicist and a mathematician for the bachelor and the master's first. And there I really met friends who were international, who didn't give a damn where I was coming from, which really embraced me and loved me. And that's when I kind of had time to finally, okay, I can now think about what I like, sexual perspective, and what I'd like to do. And I quickly realized initially that I was interested in men. I realized my gay identity. And I came out to my friends, which all were very warm and welcoming and loving, which is very great. My parents were very different. Gay cliche, I came out first to my mom, to poet, And again, my parents are really beautiful people, very loving people, very compassionate people. And my mom was a poet and a journalist. You can imagine there might be a few gay men around that scene. But she still couldn't deal with it at all. And that's actually, I finished my master's, I went to London, for a year before I started my PhD to just do music. And that's where I met my husband, who's going to come later. He can't come right now because he is leaving tomorrow to see his family in the Netherlands. And then I just, kind of like we said, well, that's now 13 years ago. We were very young then. And we're still together, getting on that. I told it to my mom, and she really couldn't deal with that. She asked me kindly, just not to tell my dad I have a relationship, the story. And so after a year, she kind of told me that, she loves me, but she's going to end her life. She couldn't just deal with that. So I panicked, and I was like, okay, we're done. She started getting much better, and so we had this 1 year of silence. And the thing is, and if I think about that, it took a few years to complete this process because, and the more I think back, and I have to say I didn't really, I think you had more time to reflect. I didn't have yet that much time to reflect. But the more I reflect, I realize that my issue in this time was always too much compassion. Love, love the sinner, hate the sin. I really loved everybody around and tried to have compassion because I think ultimately what unites us and it's going to save this damn planet is really trying to understand each other, to have compassion, to love each other. But I've learned also a lesson that there has to be another element. There has to be an element of like, no, go yourself. I don't deal with your problems. And so I've been keeping up with my parents a long time, and kind of like in a compassionate way. I was out in my work life, out in my friends' life, but my family was really tough. To tell them like they knew about everything. They knew that I was with a man together then, but they just couldn't deal with that. It was very, very torturous and very abusive in many ways emotionally, to a point where I just really tried to understand them. Where I cut the cord and said like, what, you're part of my life. Oh, just get away, because now comes the logic. I just said, like, logically speaking, I'm distancing myself from you. So you have a choice. I can distance myself and go away, and the son you love so much is not part of your life. Or you have still a son who loves you, is the best son you can have, and he has his husband there, and we're gonna have a blast. What else do you expect? Theater, musicals, great. And only then, when I gave him the ultimatum, and I really felt in my deepest heart, that was like, showing both middle fingers, very clearly feeling that. Only then change started to happen. And only then, that's now many years ago, 4 years ago, now they love my husband, he's like the second son, and they're very happy about that. And they're just pushing us to have kids, that's not a problem. When you finally have kids, what's going on, seriously. And my husband also, it's a complex dynamics because he is from a Muslim background. He was raised very religiously. But he is the most open-minded and most curious person ever. So we've had a lot of these subjects to deal with and understand these things. And so personally, we managed to find a balance. And in the work world, I felt, it took time. Today when Arianna was giving her amazing workshop, and we were talking about what are the things that we, which are the roles we question ourselves or think about. I've asked myself the question, which role am I less thinking about? And when I was, finished my PhD, went for my postdoc to MIT, then came to Caltech as a Simons Fellow on JPL, it was always a subject. And it was always a subject because when I was example interviewing for few faculty positions, there would be this discussion where I would talk about my husband, and usually the women would be like, oh, how cute, and I'd come closer, and all the old white men would look up to the sky, look at the pigeon, and just stare and say like, is this funny stopping talking about that stuff? Because if I have to look down at him, I'll have to talk with him, and then I'm gonna say things. Or gentlemen who say then things, while you're having your faculty interview, telling you like, in my good old times, guys like you, we've done other things to them than interview them here. So you are careful. I was very careful. And I was trying, not careful because I didn't want to have, I want to have position, careful because I wanted to understand people. And also there, I came to a point where I said like, no, I don't want to live my life like that. It's too short. Life goes by like this. And if we have too much compassion, nothing's going to happen. We also have to move. And so I decided for myself on one fine day that I'm just going to be out and loud and proud. And I was fortunate enough to find really a community, especially in LA, at Caltech, beautiful people, and at JPL, even amazing people, strong community of people that are more and more discovering of people who are out and proud, who are loving, who are caring, who are clever, and who make that step. And I think, unfortunately, we do have to actively act. We have to, make it normal. To say my husband, my wife, to push it in because people do it. To wear a wedding ring, wedding band, to show them, so to see it's just a normal thing. I'm going to talk about baking cake with my husband during the weekend. As exciting as that sounds, and that's my path now. That I feel very comfortable who I am, and at the same time I feel like yes, we have to be loud, because only by being loud and by saying no, we don't allow you to do whatever you want, and no, there are boundaries, and you shall not cross those.
We're going to open up for questions, so y'all think about your questions, and there's going to be some people, I think, walking around with microphones, okay? So think about what questions you want to ask. Maybe we'll go back the other way. Thank you for all that you said. That applies in so many situations, I feel like. I'm curious, do you all feel like, you talked about the intersection of so many different identities that many, most of you on this stage have. Do you feel your outsider status? Do you feel like you have an outsider status, and has that given you a different kind of perspective or insight that has added value in your work, in your STEM work? For instance, for you at
General Motors? At General Motors, you mean? I think before I had an outsider status, and it was actually a personal decision, because I didn't want to be out, and after I came out, then it's been great. I mean, everybody knows my wife at work. It's like you. We do things that are interesting, and we can share those things with everybody now. Before it was so hard.
Yes, I mean, even you've talked about, like, in the building where you work, sometimes you were one of two women, sometimes you were one of, perhaps the only Latina, the only lesbian. Were you able to bring something to the table, or any of you, if you want to speak into this? Was there a time or a moment where you felt like you had some insight that maybe added value in a way that they didn't expect, or? Well,
I think that inclusion is the best thing ever, because inclusion let us have all these ideas and all these perspectives of life that you wouldn't have if we don't include. And at work, that has been amazing. I mean, in the sense that now we are able to be open about all these things. We have all different paths in life, and all can talk about that and can show that in a respectful way. So I think, to me, being out has been the best, really.
Ron,
professionally and personally.
Any of that?
Sure. So when I was graduating a PhD in applied math from an engineering institution, my PhD is in computational aerodynamics, my advisor was sort of pushing me to look at national labs and a postdoc. And I just happened to be visiting Los Angeles, and because my boyfriend, now husband, lived in LA and I lived in upstate New York. And we went to a movie theater, a group of gay guys. I forget what we were gonna go see, but it happened to be that the chair of the Occidental College math department was an openly gay man, and he said, "Oh, if when you get on the job market, you should apply." And we have this minority postdoc that we try to bring diverse people to explore what a liberal arts college would look like for people who wouldn't necessarily be thinking of teaching as a career. I said, okay, I'll consider it, and it did it. And that was the connection that made me go to Occidental College, and then eventually, become a tenure-track professor and stay for a long time. So you just never, if you're open to other experiences, you never know how your network will be built around the different aspects of your identity. If he hadn't been out also, then maybe that connection wouldn't have happened.
So that's a great example of how things can work in your favor, and there may also be challenges, or maybe in the past. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I had a relatively recent experience with working with my board at the time, and the board of directors was almost exclusively, probably about 80% older white men, and which is very common for a lot of boards. And so we were going through this process of evaluating our mission, our values, and that sort of thing. And so we did a little workshop, and one of the groups within the workshop came up with this idea. They said, well, we should have a social responsibility statement. Yeah, we should have a social responsibility statement. So I don't know what came over me, but I just decided, you know what, this is my one chance. And so I stood up and said to all these people, and looked them in the eye, and I said, I want you to understand the consequences of what you just said. So I looked out around the room and I said, half of you will not be in this boardroom 3 or 4 years from now as a result of this statement. I want you to understand that when you say that you're going to live by a value that is around diversity and inclusion and being open to people who are not like yourself, then it means that you no longer are a part of that leadership bubble that you're in right now. And they looked at me, there was a pregnant pause in the room. And then they said, we want to do it. And it was because I had that sense of being an outsider that I challenged them, and they said, okay, I get it. So I think that was pretty cool.
Did you want to add something?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of whether having an outsider status has influenced my career, I think yes, very much so. I think it's influenced what I've studied. I've studied bullying. A lot of my research has been on health disparities, racial, ethnic, and gender health disparities. I think my feeling like an outsider, my feeling marginalized, my feeling like, having sex with another man was illegal in most of the states back when I was coming out. I feel like that very much has informed the topics that I have studied, studying issues like bullying, et cetera. And I also think it's helped me as a physician. Very little surprised me. I learned not to make assumptions, not to assume that I could tell someone's life story from the way they looked, their station in life. So I think there are all sorts of ways in which I have found it helpful to have had the experience of being an outsider in most of the environments I was in.
Cool. Did you want to add anything?
Oh, I think, yeah, I'd like to add a small thing.
Sure.
And I think in general, as, queer people, LGBTQI+, or thinking out of the box, there's two things to it. First, we learn to confront the people we love the most with something they might not like. So we, learn to stand up for ourselves. We also have to question a lot and think a lot because we have to question ourselves. Where do we belong? What are we? So, and we have to do things which society in many ways does not, look great upon. So I think we have this kind of like evolutionary trends as we're growing up. If we do this process, that teaches us to think more carefully, to be prepared, to think diverse, to think out of the box. And so I think we actually have a good training to actually become great scientists in many ways. Because we're learning that critical thinking, and also we're learning as well to stand to an idea if we think it's right at one point, and to express it. So we have a great advantage, I think. And I mean, in the archives last night, there's been a lot of the gay scientists, and I think the more you reflect about that, there's been a lot of great gay and lesbian and queer and trans scientists all over history, and I think that was a similar thing. We have a gift in many ways, and I would see it really as a positive, beautiful gift that we can use to catalyze science.
So anybody who has questions, raise your hand and I'll kind of point to you, but in the meantime, I'll keep asking. Dr. Buckmire, you talked about the sort of idea of people first, and I want to explore that. We're here at a STEM conference, but the whole STEM in service of humanity, in service of people. Julia, you talked about the values and the values statement. So I'm curious, maybe I'll go this way. Dr. Schuster, you're building a medical school now. What are some of the values that you take into account when you're thinking, of course there's innovation, et cetera, on one hand, but on the other hand, that it's people first, or what you're thinking about in terms of serving people?
Yeah, I mean, our school has a particular mission. It's a school that's focused on medical education. That's its primary reason for existence. And the things that attracted me to the opportunity were that it is a school that is focused on person-centered care. The whole idea that you focus on what's best for the patient, and the patient has autonomy and ultimately makes the decisions. You don't choose for them. We are focused on community health and population health. The idea that what happens outside of the clinic has much more influence on your life, on your health, than what happens in the clinic. The kind of idea that I'm sure most have heard, that your zip code is the best predictor of your life expectancy more than anything else. And that being in a community that is really under-resourced has a huge effect on people's health. So this is all part of the fabric of our school. We want our students to understand how to understand diversity, understand inclusion, understand serving underserved communities. And so it's very much focused on people, and in a way that one might hope all medical schools would be, but I think we're really pushing that. And so I've already forgotten exactly what your question was.
An example would be what you talked about a little bit, which was that idea of having the free tuition. That's putting that idea into action, because as you were talking earlier about hoping to have doctors be able to serve because they're not weighted by paying back loans.
Yeah, I mean, so we have, we've been able, through the generosity of Kaiser Permanente, we'll have full tuition scholarships and full insurance scholarships for the first 5 classes, and then 50% after that. And I hope to be able to raise philanthropy to bring it up after that as well. But the idea is that our school, many students show up at med school hoping to go into primary care. They're mission driven. They want to work in underserved communities. They want to change the world. They want to save the world. It's that kind of mentality. And then they have debt. The average debt is $200,000, and it can go up to $400,000. And so as they start looking at debt and growing up and realizing what it means, they change their career choice. And so we wanted to create an environment that, first of all, will support people who want to go into primary care, and not give the message that people sometimes get, that you're too smart for primary care, or that's not a very interesting field, you should go into this other field that also happens to pay very well. And I do recognize that all of medicine pays well compared to most jobs in the country or in the world. But regardless, we wanted our students to be able to want to go into primary care and stick with it, want to work in underserved communities and stick with it, and not have these huge amounts of debt factor into their decision. So they'll be able to go into whatever they want to go into. We're not tying the tuition to any payback, any service requirement. They can work wherever they want. They can go into whatever they want. But we want to support them in really following their dreams and not having debt affect that.
Yeah. Dr. Bradsher, you, before you came to lead the institute that you're leading here, you were leading foundations around food safety, and then another foundation around allergies, but your role has been sort of the president, the leader. So what would you say are the qualities of leadership and team building and culture building, that work across different STEM environments?
And I want to relate my response here to your previous question, which is really about, it really boils down to values. And, one of the values that I feel is most important for me as a leader is transparency. And that the rug doesn't exist, that proverbial rug where something gets brushed under it. And, you know, it's so important to be genuine and to be willing to talk about whatever the issue is. You know, and it can be, you know, many things pop up over the course of business that it would be very easy to kind of brush it under the rug and not talk about something. But I had an employee say to me fairly recently, she said, you know what what I love about working for you and working with you is that you don't ignore the elephant in the room, you call it out. And I think that's really important. And I think being a gay woman has sort of positioned me, as you said earlier, it positions us where it's a part of who we are, that we're automatically thinking critically, I think, because you know, how many of you have been in a situation where you scan the room and you think, okay, is there someone here that I align myself with? I mean, you're always looking for connection. And I think that being a gay woman has positioned me to be in that position of looking for that sort of critical issue. And so I really encourage everyone to think about how to be transparent in what you do, and think about being open and genuine.
Great. Our time is so short. Please raise your hand if you have a question, but I want to throw out one last one, if I may. Or do you have a question?
We're running, we
At 50
either
or
have
not?
time for one more question, one more question from
One more
here, or
question?
maybe
Okay.
one or two from the
I
floor.
would like to hear from all of you, since much of our audience is students. Is there a lesson that you have that you want to share, like that you would say you wish you knew, you would tell your younger self, as it were? Are there any lessons along the way that you feel like if someone had told you, or that you would like to tell your younger self, in a sense?
I would say that it gets better. And it's worth it, and it's been an interesting path, not easy, but it gets much, much better. So that's...
I'd like to say the more, you've got, again, more time to reflect, but I would say just care less. And I don't mean it, I mean it in a most loving way. Love so deeply, but don't care too much, You're wonderful. Just be yourself, and people will adjust. And if they need help to, sort out their own issues, because that's what they're going to have, well, LA is a great place to have, well, unfortunately it costs a lot, but it's otherwise a great place to find the right tricks.
All right.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. I think we have one
Classes?
over here. Thank you.
This is kind of similar to what you just answered, but maybe a follow-up. I was just wondering, how do you see or fulfill your role as mentors to the next generation of scientists? And are there things that you've learned from mentoring future generations? And if you could just expand on how you fulfill that role.
I gave a speech a year ago. I had to give sort of the crowning speech of my career a year ago, and I did it on mentorship, which is Googleable. You can see all my views on mentorship. One of them is that I think it needs to be considered by promotion committees. It's it's sort of expected but not rewarded in academia. And I think that it should, people should actually have time to do it. It should be I have to write these reference letters for people to get promoted. It's part of my life. People I've never met, it's just how it works. They need people to write letters that don't know the person going for promotion. I've never been asked whether they've done adequate mentorship, what's become of their mentees. So I think we need to really revamp how we treat mentorship in academia. As someone who is gay, and as far as anyone could tell, the first openly gay, truly openly gay, full professor at Harvard Med School, at least the only one that the students could find. There were other wonderful people who just weren't visible to students. I'm used to having people showing up in my office, emailing me, and that speech you mentioned had people emailing me from around the world, asking for advice. And what I'd say is, I love mentorship, and I think many people who go into academia do, and I imagine everyone on this panel does, but there's an extra thing that I got by being gay in an environment where there weren't many others in my generation who were accessible, which is feeling like I really got to pay forward. I benefited enormously from mentors, most of whom weren't gay, but my whole career was sort of created by amazing mentors. And I should also throw in there luck. To answer the question you asked before, one of the most important things is just luck, and when it happens, seizing it. But what I'd say back to mentorship is, as you all get older, I hope you will enjoy helping LGBTQ or whoever it is, younger people, get advice, because they can't always get it from everybody. And so I always felt like it was my obligation, but one that I felt was a gift to me, that I got to be in that role and help others who will then help others. So I've really enjoyed my opportunities for mentorship.
A lot of us are students here, and I was sort of wondering, since like activism takes time, it takes mental energy, it takes emotional energy, do you have any advice, or how did you, I guess, balance that with, I guess, what is essentially your day job as just like being a student?
Time management.
Everything's time management.
So, I mean, this is not specifically about activism, but I will tell you that the one thing that I look back and say I wish I'd done more of is had more fun.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that I was sort of a nose to the grindstone student, and I did not, if I reflected now, if I look back and I said, I wish I had just done a few more things that let my hair down, because it's all business now, and I wish I had more time. But as far as activism, I think, it is about time management, and it is about carving out time for yourself to do things that you believe in, whether it's being an activist, or whether it's skeet shooting, or whether it's skiing, or whatever it is. It's carving out that time to have some fun and to do something that you feel passionate about.
Can I just add one thing in that way?
Very quickly.
Just very quickly. And I think don't underestimate how much you're already doing just by being you as a form of activism.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
So much. So be kind to yourself. You're doing already a huge job.
Perfect advice. Let's give this wonderful panel a warm round of applause. Thank you so much.